When I was about 16, my parents decided to take a last-minute weekend trip out of town. It wasn't unusual. They liked little getaways to wine country or the mountains. And I was at the age where they trusted me to be home alone for a couple nights. We live in a quiet suburban neighborhood, one of those cookie-cutter developments with identical houses, trimmed lawns, and nosy neighbors who wave at you while watering their plants. Honestly, nothing bad ever really happened around here. So when my parents asked if I'd be okay alone for the weekend, I didn't even hesitate. I was actually looking forward to it. I could stay up late, order junk food, binge horror movies without my mom complaining about the volume. The first night went exactly how I expected. I ordered takeout, played some Dead by Daylight online with friends, and passed out around 2 a.m. The second night, though, is when things got weird. It was around 11:30. I was in the living room scrolling through my phone with a movie playing in the background. I remember the television was showing one of those bad 90s slasher flicks that always came on cable. Out of nowhere, I heard a tap at the front window. At first, I thought it was my imagination, or maybe a bug hitting the glass. But then it happened again. A slow, deliberate tap-tap-tap against the glass. Our front porch has this small overhang and one of those wide, rectangular windows beside the door. The blinds were half closed, so I couldn't immediately see who or what was out there. I muted the television and sat completely still, listening. And then I heard it. A man's voice, low and kind of shaky. He said, "Hey, can you open up? I need to use your phone." Every hair on my body stood up. I didn't answer. I just stayed completely still, hoping maybe he'd think no one was home. But then the doorknob rattled. Not like a test. It was forceful, like someone was trying to turn it hard, expecting it to open. I grabbed my phone and called my dad immediately. He didn't pick up. I tried my mom, no answer. They were probably out at dinner somewhere with bad reception. That's when I remembered my neighbor, Mr. Dalton. Retired cop, lived right next door. He was usually up late, watching television in his den. I called his number, thank God I had it saved. He answered on the second ring. I kept my voice low and told him someone was outside my house trying to get in. He went quiet for a second and then said he was grabbing his gun and coming over. I stayed on the line with him, crouched behind the couch, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. And then, another voice. This one was a woman. She called out, "Please, it's an emergency. I just need to come inside." But here's the thing. The voice sounded off. It didn't sound desperate. It sounded rehearsed. Almost like someone pretending to sound scared. I didn't move. I barely breathed. A minute later, Mr. Dalton's voice shouted from his porch, "Hey, get the hell off that property before I call the cops." I heard footsteps running off into the night. When Mr. Dalton reached my porch, he didn't see anyone. He told me to stay inside, lock every door and window, and he called the police. When the officers arrived about 15 minutes later, they found footprints in the flower bed under my living room window. 2 different sets. One large, one smaller. They followed the tracks down the street, but they disappeared near an alleyway that cut between 2 houses. They searched the area but didn't find anyone. The scariest part? There was no car seen leaving the neighborhood. Whoever it was, they either lived nearby or were still out there somewhere, on foot, watching. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. And to this day, every time I hear a tap at the window, my stomach sinks. This happened last summer, around July. I was staying alone at my family's old house while they were out of town for a week. The house is in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of town, lots of trees and only a few neighbors nearby. I was supposed to just chill, catch up on some reading, and relax. It was my first night there. I got home around 9 p.m., unpacked, then just watched television until midnight. The house felt empty but familiar. I went to bed early because I had plans the next day. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke up to this faint scratching noise coming from outside my bedroom window. It was so quiet I wasn't sure if I imagined it at first. But then I heard it again, slow, steady scratching. like nails on wood. I got up and peeked through the curtains. Nothing. The yard was pitch black, but the porch light was on, casting some shadows on the bushes. I didn't see anyone or anything, so I tried to ignore it and went back to bed. About 10 minutes later, the scratching came back. Only this time, it was right outside my window. I could clearly hear it on the wooden frame. My heart started racing. I pulled back the curtains slowly, and that's when I saw him. A man was standing just inches from the glass. His face was pale, almost gray in the moonlight. He had dark, tangled hair, and his eyes were wide open, staring right at me. His hands were pressed against the window, fingers splayed out like he was trying to get in. He didn't say anything. He didn't move, just stood there watching me, breathing heavy. I froze for a moment, then whispered my roommate's name, even though I was alone. My phone was on the dresser, but I didn't want to move. I didn't want to take my eyes off him. Suddenly, the man tapped the glass 3 times soft. Deliberate taps, then slowly turned and disappeared into the dark. I stayed awake the rest of the night, listening. I thought maybe it was some homeless guy or a drunk person wandering around, but the way he just watched me, it didn't feel random. The next morning, I checked outside. There were muddy footprints circling the house. They stopped at every window, my bedroom, the kitchen, even the bathroom. No prints leading away, just around the house like he was surveying it. I told my family when they got back. They said some people had been breaking into houses around the neighborhood lately, but no one had seen anyone this bold. I installed new locks and got a security camera after that. The footage showed a shadowy figure lurking outside late at night for the next 3 nights. No clear face, but tall and thin, just standing and staring at the house. I never heard any scratching again, but every time I close my eyes at night, I see that pale face pressed against my window, and I know he's still out there somewhere. My name's Caleb, and I grew up in a small town just outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. This happened about 3 years ago, on the 4th of July. A couple of my buddies from high school were throwing a last-minute get-together at this old lake house one of their uncles owned. Nothing fancy, just a grill, some cheap fireworks, and a bunch of people we hadn't seen in years. The kind of night that felt simple in the best possible way. We stayed out way too late. The bonfire was still going after midnight, and someone had a Bluetooth speaker blasting classic rock from the 80s. It was one of those nights where you just lose track of time. Around 1:30 in the morning, I finally decided to head out. The drive back home was about an hour, and most of it was back roads. Twisting, narrow 2-lane roads cutting through thick stretches of forest with barely any lighting. If you've ever driven through East Tennessee at night, you know how eerie it can get. I wasn't worried though. I'd done that drive 100 times. I had the windows down, music playing low, and the leftover smell of fireworks hanging in the air. About 20 minutes in, I noticed something up ahead in the road. At first, it looked like maybe a branch or some kind of animal. But as I got closer, my stomach dropped. It was a person, a man, standing completely still in the middle of my lane. He wasn't waving me down. He wasn't even moving. Just standing there, dead center of the road, like a statue. I hit the brakes hard and swerved just enough to avoid him, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear the tires on the gravel shoulder. In my headlights, I got a good look at him for maybe half a second. He was wearing a tattered red jacket. Could have once been part of a uniform, maybe. His face was pale, gaunt, and I swear to God, he was smiling. Not like a friendly smile, it was this weird, empty grin. The kind that makes every instinct in your body tell you to run. I didn't stop. I didn't ask if he needed help. I floored it. For the next 5 or 6 miles, I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see headlights or someone chasing after me on foot. But there was nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself it was probably just some drunk guy from a nearby house messing around or trying to scare people. It was the 4th of July, after all. People get weird, but about 10 minutes later, I came around a curve and my blood ran cold. There he was again. Same jacket, same empty grin, standing dead center in the road. There is absolutely no way he could have gotten ahead of me unless he cut through the dense woods or knew a shortcut. But there weren't any. Not out there. This time, I didn't slow down. I swerved hard onto the other side of the road and kept going. I don't think I've ever been that terrified in my life. The rest of the drive was a blur. I barely remember getting home. I just know that when I pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a good 10 minutes, doors locked, too scared to even get out of the car. I didn't sleep that night, and I never told anyone about it. Not until now. I've driven those same roads dozens of times since, but I've never seen him again. The weirdest part, though, came a couple of weeks later. I was at a gas station near my house, and the old guy behind the counter was making small talk about the 4th of July. I half joked and asked him if anyone else had reported seeing weird stuff out on those back roads that night. His face went pale. He asked me, dead serious, was it a man in a red jacket? I didn't say anything, just nodded. He told me a story about a guy who used to live out there years ago. Said he got hit by a drunk driver on the 4th of July, back in the late 90s. The driver never stopped, and the man died right there in the road. Ever since then, people claim to see him on that same stretch of highway, always around Independence Day. I'm not saying I believe in ghosts. I'm really not. But I also know what I saw. And to this day, I won't drive those back roads after dark. Not on the 4th of July. Not ever again. This happened to me and 2 of my friends about 3 years ago, on the 4th of July. I haven't told too many people about it because, honestly, it sounds made up even to me. But it's one of those stories that sticks with you whether you want it to or not. So, every summer, my buddy Alex rents out this small lakefront cabin about an hour outside of town. Nothing fancy, one of those cheap Airbnbs with mismatched furniture, a barely working grill, and one of those janky above-ground pools. But the spot had one huge selling point. No neighbors for miles, which made it perfect for drinking, being reckless, and not having to worry about noise complaints. That year, it was me, Alex, and our other friend Connor. The plan was simple. Head up there early on the 4th, get the grill going, drink until the fireworks started, and then pass out under the stars like we were 13 again. No phones, no responsibilities, no one bothering us. We got there around noon, and everything was totally normal. It was humid as hell, and the bugs were relentless. But the lake was calm and the vibe was perfect. We set up the speakers, started drinking, and by sundown, we were all pretty hammered. Now here's where things get weird. Somewhere around 9:30, Connor decided he wanted to shoot off fireworks by the water. None of us had actually bought any, but he swore he saw some on the porch earlier in the day. So, we all go out back to help him look. And sure enough, there's this small, unopened box sitting by the door. None of us remembered buying them. The listing for the Airbnb specifically said no fireworks, but we chalked it up to maybe the owner leaving them behind for renters. Dumb idea, but you know how it is when you've been drinking. The weird thing was, the box wasn't labeled, just a plain beat-up cardboard box with duct tape across the top. No brand name, no safety instructions, nothing. At this point, any sober person would have left it alone. But of course, we weren't sober. We dragged the box down to the dock, opened it up, and inside were these fireworks I'd never seen before. Not like your usual bottle rockets or Roman candles. These were weird. The casings were made of this dull, waxy material, and the wicks were braided in this intricate, almost decorative way. Alex said they looked handmade, and I remember Connor joking that we'd probably blow ourselves up. But we set one up anyway. Connor lit it and ran back, and when it went off, it didn't make a sound. I swear to God, it shot up into the air, exploded into this deep, bluish-green color, and then instead of crackling or whistling, it just hummed. A low, vibrating hum that you could feel in your chest. Like when you stand too close to a subwoofer at a concert, and the whole sky turned that same weird color for a split second. I know how that sounds, but I'm telling you, it wasn't normal. After a few seconds, everything went dark again. No smoke, no smell, no leftover debris. Just total, unnatural silence. Even the crickets and frogs around the lake went dead quiet. That was the part that really freaked me out. Connor started laughing, saying it was the quietest firework ever, but Alex and I weren't laughing. I remember looking around and realizing how still everything was. The air felt heavy, like the pressure dropped all at once. That's when we noticed the light. Off in the woods, maybe 50 yards from the edge of the dock, there was this soft, flickering glow, like someone walking around with a lantern. It moved slowly between the trees toward us. Now, there was no one else out there. We knew for a fact there wasn't a single other cabin within miles. The road leading in was one way in, one way out, and we hadn't seen a single other car all day. We all froze, and for a second, no one said anything. Then Alex whispered, "Did one of you guys leave a fire going?" Neither of us had. The light kept moving closer. Not fast, just steady. And then it stopped. Stayed in one spot behind this tree line, maybe 20 yards away. I remember Connor yelling out something like, "Hey man, private property." No answer. That's when the humming came back. Not from the sky this time, but from the woods, from where the light was. This deep, bassy vibration that made the dock planks rattle under our feet. And then I swear on everything, the light split into two. Like a second one appeared right beside it, and then a third. They started moving, circling the edge of the woods, surrounding us. I don't know what snapped in us, but all three of us bolted back to the cabin, locked the doors, turned off all the lights. None of us had cell service out there, and the landline inside was dead. We sat in the dark for what felt like hours, hearing nothing but that low hum in the distance. At some point, it stopped, and we must have passed out from exhaustion because the next thing I remember was waking up on the floor of the living room to daylight streaming in through the window. Everything was normal. No lights, no sound, no weird feeling in the air. The box of fireworks was gone, like it had never been there. We checked the dock, the woods, the road. Nothing. No tire tracks, no footprints, no signs anyone else had ever been out there. We packed up and left without even cleaning the place. Haven't been back since. I know how this sounds. Believe me, I do. But all three of us remember it the exact same way. And none of us have any explanation for what we saw or what we heard that night. I've thought about it every 4th of July since. And every year without fail, I get a text from an unknown number. It just says, "Light one for us." Every single year.
I've always been a night owl, but when I took that late-night train from the city, I wasn't expecting to become part of a story I'd never forget. It was a chilly evening in November, the kind where the air feels dense, like it's wrapping itself around you. I had stayed late at the office, working on a project that just wouldn't come together. By the time I made it to the station, the rush hour had long since passed. The platform was eerily empty, just a few stragglers like me, waiting to get home. When the train finally pulled in, it was nearly empty. I chose a seat in the middle of the car, settling into the quiet as we started to move. I was tired, but the kind of tired where your thoughts are still racing, so I kept my eyes open, watching the dark landscape blur past the window. About 20 minutes into the ride, something shifted. I can't explain it exactly, but the air in the car felt different, like the pressure had dropped. I glanced up and noticed the lights flicker, just for a moment. The train was slowing down, but we weren't near a station. We came to a full stop in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense woods on either side of the track. I checked my phone, but of course, there was no signal. I looked around, wondering if anyone else was feeling uneasy, but the car was still mostly empty. Just a few passengers spread out, all of them keeping to themselves. One man sat a few rows ahead, his head resting against the window, eyes closed. Another woman was buried in a book, oblivious to the world around her. Then I saw him, sitting alone at the far end of the car, a man I hadn't noticed before. He was dressed in a long coat, his hat pulled low over his face. Something about him caught my attention. Maybe it was the way he was sitting, perfectly still, hands resting on his knees, staring straight ahead. He didn't seem to have noticed that we'd stopped. He didn't seem to notice anything at all. Minutes passed. The train didn't move. No announcements came over the speakers to explain the delay. I shifted in my seat, trying to ignore the growing tension in my chest, but something about that man was unsettling. I kept stealing glances at him, hoping he'd do something, check his watch, sigh in frustration, anything, but he didn't move. And then, just as I was starting to convince myself that it was nothing, he turned his head and looked straight at me. His eyes were dark, shadowed under the brim of his hat, but they seemed to lock onto mine with a kind of intensity that made my skin crawl. I quickly looked away, pretending to be interested in something out the window, but I could feel his gaze burning into me. My heart was pounding in my chest. I knew it was irrational, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The train shuddered and started moving again, slowly at first, then picking up speed. I glanced back at the man, and he had turned back to his original position, staring straight ahead. But the unease didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger. We pulled into the next station, and I half expected the man to get up, but he stayed where he was. A couple of new passengers boarded, and I felt a small wave of relief. The car wasn't quite so empty anymore. I tried to relax, telling myself that I was just being paranoid, that it had been a long day and my mind was playing tricks on me. But as we continued on, I noticed something even stranger. The man wasn't the only one acting odd. The other passengers, the man who had been dozing, the woman with the book, had become unnervingly still. They sat like statues, their faces blank, eyes staring straight ahead, just like the man at the end of the car. It was as if they had all simultaneously checked out of reality. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. This wasn't normal. Something was wrong with these people. I stood up, intending to move to another car, but as I did, the train jolted violently, throwing me off balance. I caught myself on the seat in front of me and looked around in confusion. The lights flickered again, longer this time, plunging the car into brief darkness before they stabilized. When they came back on, my breath caught in my throat. The man at the end of the car was standing now, his hat tilted just enough that I could see his face. He was smiling, but there was something off about it, something almost predatory. And the others, the passengers who had seemed so lifeless, were now all turned in their seats, their eyes fixed on me. Panic surged through me. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I had to get out of there. I pushed through the car, past the unmoving passengers, not daring to look back at the man. My hand shook as I reached for the door at the end of the car, yanking it open and stumbling into the next one. This car was empty, truly empty, but it didn't feel any safer. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and the lights above buzzed faintly. I moved quickly, putting as much distance as I could between me and whatever was happening in the previous car. I didn't stop until I reached the front of the train, near the conductor's compartment. I banged on the door, desperate for some kind of human interaction, some explanation for what I had just seen. But there was no answer. I tried the handle, but it was locked tight. I stood there, breathing heavily, trying to collect myself. Maybe I was losing it. Maybe I had just imagined the whole thing. But as the train sped through the darkness, the feeling of being watched crept back over me. I turned slowly, and there, at the far end of the car, I saw him. The man with the hat. He was standing in the doorway I had just come through, his smile wider now, his eyes gleaming with something that made my blood run cold. He took a step toward me, and I did the only thing I could think of. I pulled the emergency brake. The train screeched in protest, lurching violently as it ground to a halt. I didn't wait. As soon as it stopped, I bolted for the nearest exit, throwing the door open and jumping down onto the tracks. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to get away. The forest loomed around me, dark and silent, but I didn't care. I just kept running, the sound of my own footsteps pounding in my ears, until I couldn't run anymore. I don't know how long I wandered through those woods before I finally found a road. A passing car picked me up, and I must have looked like a madman, rambling about haunted trains and strange passengers. They took me to the nearest town, and I eventually made it home, but I've never set foot on a train since. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed in that car, if I hadn't pulled the brake and run. But then I remember the man's smile, and the way those passengers looked at me, and I'm glad I never found out.
It started with a glitch. Not the usual kind, like a lag in a video game or a buffering wheel on my streaming service. This one was different. I noticed it when I was editing a video late at night, headphones on, completely absorbed in my work. It was a typical vlog, nothing fancy, just me walking through the city, talking about my day. As I scrubbed through the footage, I saw it. A flicker. In the corner of the screen, just a frame or two. I rewound it, half expecting it to be a trick of the light, but it wasn't. There was something there, someone. At first, I thought it was a reflection. I had filmed in front of a glass building, so maybe it was just a passerby. But when I slowed the footage down, my blood ran cold. It wasn't a random person. It was me. Another version of me, just standing there, staring, not moving, not blinking, just watching. I froze, my hand still gripping the mouse, my eyes locked on the screen. My heart raced, but I couldn't look away. There I was, in the corner of the frame, not part of the footage I had filmed, but standing in the background, out of place, out of time. I had no memory of seeing anyone like that while I was filming. No one had stopped me, no one had stared like that. I would have noticed, right? For the next few hours, I tried to convince myself it was an error, a digital artifact, maybe. I replayed the clip over and over, zoomed in, adjusted the lighting. But the more I tried to rationalize it, the more it unnerved me. The other me didn't move. It was like watching a paused moment in a movie that wasn't meant to be. Things got worse the next day. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not in a paranoid way, but something deeper, more primal. Whenever I glanced at my reflection, on my phone, in windows, mirrors, I half expected to see the other version of myself lurking, just like in the footage. That night, I couldn't sleep. The glow of my laptop was the only light in the room. I decided to go through my footage again, thinking maybe I had missed something, anything that could explain what I had seen. But when I opened the file, it was gone. The footage had changed. The moment I saw that other me had disappeared, replaced by normal, uneventful clips. It was as if it had never been there. I wasn't going crazy. I knew what I saw. But now, there was no proof. That's when I noticed it. My reflection in the laptop screen, faint but unmistakable. It wasn't copying my movements. I leaned closer, holding my breath. My reflection stared back, emotionless, unblinking. And then, it smiled. It was just past midnight, and I was alone in the living room, flipping through the channels like I always did on nights when sleep seemed impossible. The static hum of the television and the dim glow from the screen were the only things keeping the darkness from feeling suffocating. That's when I stumbled upon a strange late-night talk show, something I'd never seen before. The host, a sharp-dressed man with a smile that felt too wide, too polished, was mid-conversation with a guest. But the atmosphere was off. There was no laughter, no applause, just a thick, uncomfortable silence. The kind that makes your skin itch. I leaned in closer, the remote hovering in my hand, frozen. The guest, a woman, pale and nervous, kept glancing off screen, as if she were being watched. The host, on the other hand, was calm, unnaturally so. His eyes seemed to bore through her, and something about his presence made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Do you believe in fate?" the host asked suddenly, his voice soft but commanding, as though he was speaking directly to me. I shifted in my seat, feeling exposed. The woman on screen hesitated, glancing down at her trembling hands. "Sometimes." "I do," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The host leaned forward, his grin widening. "You should. Because sometimes, fate isn't what we think it is. Sometimes, it's already decided." I don't know why, but my heart raced as though I were part of the conversation. Something about the show felt too real, too present. I reached for the remote to change the channel, but my fingers seemed heavy, sluggish. It was as if the show didn't want me to turn away. Suddenly, the screen flickered, just for a second, but in that moment, I saw something. A shadow. No, a figure, standing just behind me. My breath caught in my throat as I spun around in my chair. But there was nothing. Just the empty room, drenched in the cold light of the TV. When I looked back at the screen, the woman was gone. The camera was focused solely on the host now, and he was staring directly at me. His smile had faded, replaced by an expression I couldn't quite place. It wasn't anger or amusement, it was something darker. "You shouldn't have looked away," he said, his voice almost a growl now. "Because now, it's too late." The TV blinked off by itself. My heart pounded in my chest, and the room seemed darker than before, almost like the shadows had shifted. The silence that followed was deafening, oppressive. Then, there was a knock at my door. I didn't move at first, just stared at the door as the knocks came again, slow, deliberate. "Don't open it," I whispered to myself. But my feet betrayed me. They carried me to the door. My hand already on the knob before I realized what I was doing. The knocking stopped. I stood there, frozen, my pulse thudding in my ears. I could hear someone, something, on the other side. I wanted to scream, to call out, but no words came. Then, from the other side of the door, a voice whispered, just loud enough to hear. "Fate's already decided." I yanked my hand away from the knob, stumbling back, my chest tightening. The TV clicked back on by itself. The host was back on screen, his face filling the frame, a knowing smirk playing on his lips. "I'll see you soon," he said. The TV cut to black again. That was when the door handle turned.
My name's Daniel. This is a story my late Uncle Carter told me years ago, something that happened to him back in the summer of 1996. I never thought much of it at the time, but after he passed, I found an old stack of his journals in my dad's attic. Reading through those pages, I realized what he experienced was a hell of a lot darker than he ever let on. Carter was a Coast Guard veteran, built like a dock piling, weathered, tough, and not the kind of man to get spooked easily. He spent most of his adult life on or near the water, handling storms and situations that would have sent lesser men packing. That summer, Carter agreed to take a short assignment at a decommissioned lighthouse off the coast of Maine. The station had been automated for years, but they were having trouble with the beacon and backup systems. Until a full crew could get out there, someone needed to babysit the place and monitor the equipment. It wasn't an easy place to get to. A narrow strip of rock, barely visible at high tide, with one stone lighthouse rising about 60 feet into the air. No dock. Supply drops by boat when the weather was decent, or by chopper if it wasn't. He brought enough canned food, coffee, a cot, and a few paperbacks to last him 6 days. 2 radio check-ins a day. Otherwise, he'd be alone. The first couple of days were uneventful. Cold mist hanging over the water, waves slapping against the rocks. The kind of isolation Carter actually liked. But on the third night, something woke him. A sound he couldn't immediately place. It wasn't the wind rattling the shutters, or the steady pulse of the foghorn. It was a soft, deliberate knocking. 3 sharp taps. And not at the door, not at the windows. Carter said it came from inside the wall itself, like someone was standing inside the stone. He grabbed his flashlight, did a full sweep of the tower. Nothing. Dense fog outside so thick he could barely see the base of the lighthouse from the top of the stairs. He chalked it up to the structure settling, or some trick of the acoustics, and went back to bed. The next morning, while making coffee, he noticed something strange near the base of the spiral staircase leading to the lantern room. A single, wet footprint. Barefoot. Not his. Too small. Slender, with long toes, pressed into the dusty floorboards. And no others. Just the one, leading toward the stairs and vanishing. Carter wrote in his journal that he tore the place apart looking for any sign of an intruder. Checked every room, the supply shed, even an old rusted storage hatch behind the kitchen. Nothing. No person, no animal, no open doors or broken windows. He radioed in his morning report like nothing happened, but he admitted in his notes that it unsettled him. That night, the knocking returned, but this time it came from the top of the lighthouse, from the lantern room itself. 3 clear knocks against the glass. Carter grabbed his flashlight and climbed the stairs. The heavy mist outside made it impossible to see more than a foot or 2 beyond the glass. He expected to find a gull or some debris caught by the wind. But when he got up there, the room was empty. No birds, no branches, nothing out of place. Then, as he turned to leave, he saw it. A handprint, pressed against the inside of the glass. 5 long, slender fingers spread wide, palm flattened against the condensation. The problem was where it was. Higher than a person standing inside could have reached. Carter said his stomach dropped. He didn't sleep much that night. By the next morning, the fog still hadn't lifted. The air inside the lighthouse felt thick and heavy, like it was holding its breath. That night, he started hearing footsteps. Soft, bare feet, slapping against the metal spiral staircase. Always going up, never down. He said the sound would start near the base and slowly ascend toward the lantern room, stopping just before reaching the top. When he'd gather his nerve to check, there was never anyone there. The pattern repeated itself through the night. On the 5th day, Carter decided to search the one place he hadn't yet. The old cellar beneath the lighthouse. It was a cramped, damp space. Barely more than a crawl space where maintenance equipment had once been stored. In the far corner, buried beneath a pile of rotted cloth and twine, he found a small, weathered lockbox. The wood was warped with age and salt. The hinges rusted. Inside was something he never described in detail. His exact words in the journal were, "I saw it, and I wish to God I hadn't." Some things aren't meant to surface. He closed the box, reburied it where he found it, and immediately called for an emergency evac. The fog was too thick for a boat to reach him until morning. Carter spent one final night in that place, holed up in the kitchen with a flare gun in his lap. At 2:11 a.m., the knocking returned. Not from the walls, not from the glass above, but from the cast iron stove, barely 3 feet from where he sat. 3 soft taps from inside the room. He wrote that he didn't turn around, didn't check. He just sat there in silence, gripping the flare gun, counting down the minutes until sunrise. When the boat finally arrived, the fog lifted like it had never been there. The captain said Carter looked like he'd aged 10 years in 6 days. He turned in his equipment, filed a brief, incomplete report, and never set foot in a lighthouse again. I asked him once, years later, what he thought was out there. If it was a person, an animal, or something else entirely. He just shook his head and muttered, "The sea keeps its own. Some places are meant to be left alone." After reading those journals, I decided to check the coordinates he mentioned. There's no lighthouse listed there now. No records. Nothing. Just empty water. And that's the part I can't shake. Not what my uncle wrote, but what nobody else ever did. My uncle Kevin worked maritime maintenance for a private shipping company for almost 15 years. He's one of those no-nonsense, old-school types. Doesn't care for ghost stories. Never believed in any of that strictly a tools and oil kind of guy. But a few summers back, at a family barbecue, he told me about one job that still makes his skin crawl. I made him repeat it twice, because the details were so specific, and every time, it was the same. This happened in 2015, off the coast of Washington State. There's a lighthouse out there called Crow's Head Point. It's not the kind you see on postcards. It's a squat, ugly thing, perched on this jagged slab of rock that juts out of the ocean like a broken tooth. The place had been automated for years, but the equipment still needed manual maintenance every so often. Kevin's job was to boat out, stay overnight, and check the electrical systems, clean the lenses, and refill the backup generator. Normally a solo job, but because of some weird equipment malfunctions earlier that year, the company sent a younger guy named Eli along with him. At first, it was routine. The place was isolated, battered by constant wind and salt spray, but nothing unusual. During the day, they scraped rust-off railings, patched old wiring, and checked the foghorn compressor. At night, they'd cook canned food over a little propane burner and play cards by lantern light. Just two guys stuck on a rock in the middle of nowhere. Nothing to be scared of. Until the third night, Kevin woke up. He said the air felt wrong. Not cold, heavy, like being underwater. He sat up in his cot and noticed immediately no beam. The lighthouse beacon wasn't turning. It was supposed to rotate automatically. And even if it failed, a backup should have kicked in. But the room was pitch black. Kevin shook Eli awake, and the two of them went up the narrow metal staircase to the beacon room. When they got there, the motor was still humming. The gears were turning, but the light was jammed in place, pointing out to sea, and something was hanging from the fixture. It was a length of drift, netting thick, slimy, half-rotted, and stinking of salt water. But the weird thing was, there was no broken window, no open hatch. The place was sealed tight. They cut it down, tossed it out into the sea spray, checked the seals, and figured it was a freak accident. Maybe a storm forced it in somehow, but neither of them could explain how it made it inside. The next night, same time. Kevin woke up and it was dead silent. No wind, no waves, just this thick, suffocating silence. He looked over and Eli was already sitting up, staring at the ceiling like he was listening for something. Then it started. A faint scraping sound. Not outside, inside. Something dragging across the concrete somewhere below them. They grabbed the knives they kept by the cots and crept down to the supply room at the base. But there was nothing. The door was still bolted from the inside. On the third night, Kevin woke to find Eli standing by the window, staring out at the dark water. When he asked what he was doing, Eli mumbled, "He's out there." Kevin asked who, and Eli pointed out toward the jagged rocks at the water's edge. He swore he'd seen a man standing there earlier, tall, still, arms at his sides, just watching the tower from the far edge of the rocks. But when the beacon's light passed back over the spot, no one was there. On the fifth night, the beacon failed again. When they reached the top of the tower, this time it wasn't jammed. The light housing was open. The massive lens, one that took both of them to lift, had been removed from its bracket. It was lying carefully in the center of the floor, and in its place was a pile of smooth black stones, stacked in a crude little tower. Kevin swears there was no way that could have happened without them hearing it, and no one should have been there, but it had. That night, they resealed everything, called for an emergency pickup at first light, and barricaded themselves in the sleeping quarters. But somewhere around 2:30 a.m., Kevin woke up to Eli whispering in his sleep. Not normal words, some kind of low, rhythmic chant, words Kevin didn't recognize. Over and over. Then it stopped. Kevin sat up and saw Eli standing at the window again, hand pressed against the glass. When he asked what he was doing, Eli whispered, "He's waiting." Kevin pulled him away from the window. They sat with their backs to the door until daylight. The company boat arrived late the next morning. Kevin never took another Lighthouse job after that. Eli quit the company 3 weeks later, moved out of state, and no one's heard from him since. Kevin told me he still doesn't believe in ghosts. Never has. But he also says some places aren't meant to be visited, and Crow's Head Point is one of them.
It was around midnight that I heard the noise first indistinct, rather like a light knock issuing from the ceiling. I paid little heed to it, merely putting it down to an old apartment building's settling creaks and groans, to which I had grown accustomed in the near year that I had been living there. That night was different. I sat on my couch, binge-watching a series, headphones in, with the world tuned out. Then, again, came this hollow, calculated knock. This time, it was louder, and it wasn't from above. It was coming from my door. I paused the show, holding my breath. The screen of my phone blinked at 12:03 a.m. Nobody should knock this time of night. I stayed still a second, listening. My heart was pounding. After a few minutes of silence, I convinced myself it must have been one of the neighbors off to work late or just some other random noise that I heard incorrectly. But the instant I went back to my show, there was again, this time 3 knocks, slow and spaced out, almost too intentional. I went over to the door, planted my against the peephole, and saw nothing. The hallway was dimly lit, all the lights flickering on and off. My stomach turned a nervous somersault. Who knocks and then just leaves? I tried shaking off the creeping anxiety, telling myself I was overreacting. But the subsequent nights, it didn't stop. Same happening every time. Knock, followed by nothing. And every time I opened up, nobody was there. I began becoming paranoid. My apartment was on the 5th floor, and the only way up was either the elevator or via the staircase at the far end of the hall. I'd hear them if they left. I decided to wait it out one night. I sat on the couch in the dark and watched the door. It happened again just after midnight, 3 knocks. My heart raced. I had jumped up, turned the handle, and pulled the door open without looking through the peephole. But this time, the hallway wasn't empty. Someone was standing at the end, just barely visible in the shadows near the staircase. I couldn't make out their face, but they were tall, wearing a hooded jacket. They didn't move, didn't say a word. Just stood there, staring. I froze, feeling my skin crawl. Then, wordlessly, they turned and went down the stairs. I slammed the door shut, locking every bolt. My hands were shaking and my mind raced. Who was that? Why did they knock on my door every night? What did they want? I called building management the next day. They looked at the security cameras. There was nothing out of the ordinary. No person went near my door around the times that I said. They said that I must have just imagined it, or heard it from another floor. But I know what I saw. They stopped knocking that night, but I am still uneasy in my house. Every creak, every soft sound in the middle of the night makes my heart start racing. I never saw that person again, but I keep wondering. Was he really gone? Or is he just waiting for the right moment to show up again?